Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll be discussing new government tracking of gold, something that we really haven't seen since the last time the government tried to confiscate the stuff. We'll also be talking about one business that is actually being helped out by government stimulus, as well as a discussion about how moonshine is apparently popular in the United States again. All that plus a whole lot more coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And it is episode 166 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, Nick, we have a lot to be getting into tonight. We are going to be talking about moonshine and how it's making quite the recovery here in the United States, as well as one business that is really doing quite well off the government stimulus plan. The business that makes the signs touting the government stimulus plan is working.
Do you see a lot of those signs?
Yes, well, that business is doing very well. Huge profit margins. But first, we are going to be getting into a really disturbing story. This is one that it kind of makes my hair stand up a little bit because it's got so much of that Big Brother-esque tone to it. Originally, I thought this was just a story about the government tracking purchases of gold over $600, but reading more into it, you say this is a story that was buried into the health care bill that's tracking everything. All purchases over $600?
Pretty much, and this is something that really it hasn't been discussed too much yet in the mainstream, although I'm hoping it'll be subject to some pretty rigorous debate. I think a lot of people just aren't really aware that this was put into the health care bill, or they haven't really thought about the implications yet. And there are going to be some pretty serious implications, especially if you're somebody who runs your own business, even if it's a pretty small business. What's happening here is that starting January 1st, 2012, the tax code, the IRS tax code, is going to be amended so that Form 1099s, which currently are used if you're an independent contractor, so you don't have withholdings, say you're paid on a commission basis, perhaps you're trying to, there's different 1099 forms. Some are for dividend income from dividends on stocks. I think there might be a 1099 for rental property income. Some pretty specific things right now. They're broadening the use of the 1099 form basically to show any income whatsoever, not just contractor income. Anytime there is a sale, a gain or a loss, and purchases and sales of good as part of a trade or business, it's going to kick in at $600. And honestly, I don't understand the minutia enough, and I don't know if the IRS has clarified yet whether that means if you purchase $600 worth of things at one time from a business, that a 1099 form is going to have to be issued, or if you purchase one thing that's $600. Either way, this is going to affect a lot of sales, especially for higher end things.
Right, and I guess I thought it was just confiscation of gold, is because when I originally found the article, it was on a gold website, and they were talking about, well, we haven't been tracking the purchases of gold like this since gold was confiscated. When was it? In the 1930s or something?
Yeah, in the 30s, during the last depression.
Where gold was actually confiscated by the government, and that was done by tracking of it. They knew exactly who had it. Turns out this is a way to collect taxes on pretty much everything that's sold, whether I'm buying $600 or selling $600 worth of gold, that'll be tracked silver, or say even if I'm selling an old used car, would that still qualify as well?
Right. I mean, you were still supposed to declare all that stuff as income if or your business was. And corporations are not exempt, by the way. This isn't just for regular people. It's also, they repealed the exemption for corporations. You were supposed to declare that stuff as income, but you didn't have to issue a separate tax form every time a sale was made.
Right, it was just, this was money I was made.
Right.
Now they want to know exactly
Well, now
what
they're
you
tightening
made money
up. They're
off
generating a huge amount of paperwork, really, for small businesses. So you have to consider that they're probably doing this because the intention is to either increase tax rates or to just tighten up on enforcement, because it used to be fairly easy, especially if you ran a cash business, to just declare a different amount. But now that every significant purchase or sale, there's going to be a 1099 issued on one end of that transaction. It's essentially they're tightening up a lot on how much they're tracking sales. And if you're somebody who does buy gold or silver, that's pretty significant, because even a half ounce of gold right now, if you're buying it from a bullion dealer, well, that's going to require that the 1099 form be issued at today's prices. You're probably looking right around $600. So it's going to allow the government to track what you're purchasing. And you were technically supposed to declare things like capital gains that you realize buying or selling gold or silver. But of course, a lot of people don't. And a lot of people don't really want the government to know that they own this stuff because they have a track record of confiscating
So I can figure out why the government's doing this. So what is the motivation here? Is it to collect taxes? Is it to see what exactly is being bought and sold and track those purchases? Or just a combination of everything? I mean, what do you think?
Well, it does all those things. And I think that there's going to be I would be very surprised if we did not see higher tax rates in the U.S. I mean, there's been talk about maybe not increasing the income tax, but creating a value-added tax, which is essentially a national sales tax. And a lot of our American viewers, or most of you, might not be familiar with a value-added tax because a VAT tax isn't just a sales tax on the end user, on the consumer. If you have a 5% value-added tax, well, it's 5% every time the goods or services change hands. So if you're buying a birdhouse that's made out of wood, well, the timber company that actually felled the trees, when they sold it to the factory, there would be a 5% tax. Then when the factory made the little pieces,
the division of labor,
the more steps there are, the more finished the product, the more steps. Well,
so
there's a 5% tax at every step.
The larger the division, the larger it's going to be.
The true rate of taxation on goods is then.
All right, so whether you don't like this from a monetary principle, you don't want to pay all those taxes, or whether you don't like it on the civil liberties principle, if you don't want the government knowing exactly what you're buying or what you're selling, either way, this is one of those bills that just screams bigger government, sends shivers up my spine. I mean, and why it's buried in this healthcare bill. I mean, that's the thing here. There's no public debate on this. Most people don't even know about it. It's still the lower media outlets that are reporting on this. The big media hasn't picked up on this at all from what I've heard out there. No one's talking about it, and there's going to be no debate because it's already been passed and signed into law, and no one really knows what it means.
There is on the good side, there's an effort to repeal this. The bill was in at least this section. I don't know if it specifically is trying to exempt gold and silver or repeal the entire 1099 thing. If this is actually enacted, it's going to be disastrous. I think you're going to see widespread noncompliance because it's just so burdensome. It's so draconian that most small business owners, they're not going to actually issue 1099 forms. There's going to be a lot of cash deals. And once you get to that point, well, maybe people just stop paying the taxes at all, which is something that a lot of people are going that way now because it's a recession. Money's tight, and a lot of people are running businesses in the gray market already where they're not paying taxes or insurance or any of that stuff. They're just running cash businesses because they can't afford to actually pay taxes. Wow. So, I mean, there is a bill introduced by Representative Dan Lundgren. I guess it's H.R. 5141, and there are 80 co-sponsors in the House right now trying to get this repealed.
I sure hope so.
But supposedly, I guess there's a lot of supporters in Congress, too, because they say it's a $17 billion tax loophole.
Well, Nick, we did say this would happen if you're going to be passing a bill into law that hasn't been read, or parts of it weren't even completed when it was passed into law. They were still writing it, yet they still debated and passed into law. We reported that this kind of thing would happen. We won't actually know what's in the bill until it's weeded out weeks, months, and even years down the line. So I'm sure there's many other insidious little laws that have been rolled into this bill as well. As people pick them out, we'll continue to report on them.
But of course, it's been enacted at this point, so it's 10 times harder to actually repeal it. If people had known that this was in the bill, I think there would have been a lot.
There would have been a lot of people.
Well, whoa! Yeah, there would have been a better chance of not having it passed, because I don't think this is something
not popular.
This is not something that most Americans would have supported, but they don't. That's one of the reasons they do this. They vote without debating or reading the bills, because then they have to debate it and defend what's in the bill. If they don't tell you, then you're just flying into it blind. Who knows? It could be wonderful things in the bill.
It's the American way, Nick. Well, I do know one business that, if you're wondering about where to invest your money, possibly some new accountants, because there's going to be a whole lot of them. If this bill is enacted, there's going to be all sorts of accountants needed, because this will really raise the bar for taxes, especially for small businesses. All right, moving along, another bill, business that's doing awesome is the sign-making business, specifically the ones who are contracted to make those American Reinvestment Act signs that are scattered all over the country. The stimulus bill that the Obama administration pushed through, one of the major things they did were spend millions and million dollars on street signs that don't say or mean anything except, hey, look at us, we're government, putting Americans back to work. So the sign makers certainly are doing well in this case. ABC News, a big news outlet reporting on this. As the midterm election season approaches, new road signs are popping up everywhere. Millions of dollars worth of signs touting the American Reinvestment Act and Recovery Act and reminding passersby that the program is, quote, putting America back to work. And Nick, I have seen more and more of these signs popping up. I never really put two and two together and said, is it because of the re-election cycle that this is happening? Does this make most Americans happy seeing these signs? Me, I've always said, well, that's a waste of money. They didn't need to put up that sign. Then again, it's only now that I found out how much these signs actually cost. One number here, and this is just one of the thousands and thousands of numbers that are out there, because not every company pays the same for each sign. Individual private contractors work out how much they're going to pay for the sign. For example, one road leading to Dallas Airport outside of Washington, D.C. has a 10 by 11 road sign that they paid $10,000 to install. And yes, these are just those plywood road signs for the most part. Some of them are metal. None of them are worth $10,000 yet, being paid for with stimulus dollars, Nick. Craziness, isn't it?
Well, the stimulus money, the whole idea of an economic stimulus, it doesn't lend itself to spending the money responsibly, because the whole idea here is that, well, we're doing good just by spending the money, right? Because somebody's going to get that money, and that stimulates the economy. So, the whole idea of an economic stimulus is really just waste money, dump money into the system. So they don't care how they allocate it. I'm sure there's somebody out there who would actually defend the idea that, well, it's putting the people who make the signs back to work.
Yeah, but Nick,
or actually, but not back to work. There's probably
so
way
many
more
useless
now than there were
things that
before.
they could spend money on. I feel so many projects out there. If you're just throwing money away, you might as well throw it away at a project
that might do some
good along the way. Besides putting up a road sign that's eventually going to find its way to the landfill.
Yeah, beyond. That's true. Beyond the signs, a lot of the projects that are being done are debatable too. There's so many projects.
Like the Squirrel Bridge we reported on
a
few weeks ago.
What was it, like $1.25 million for squirrel bridges in Arizona for these 300 endangered squirrels? There is vital infrastructure that's well past the age when it should have been replaced, like, highway bridges and things like that, that's not being fixed.
Yeah,
and they say the money's not here, but then they spend money on these,
It was one of those knee-jerk reaction stimulus funds with businesses, with the government entities just being given money and say, well, spend it, put people to work. And now they've spent low conservative estimates by people who help create this legislation, say $5 million have been spent on these signs. And the higher estimates say it's over $20 million has been spent on just signs saying putting America back to work. Are they campaign signs, Nick? Could there be some kind of thing in there that says, should tax dollars be being used this way, essentially putting campaign signs up?
It's a federal project now, so it's the law. It's not really technically partisan.
It's essentially saying we work. Our signs are working. I don't like it. Every time I see one of them,
that's essentially what it is.
They have Obama logos on them. Each one of them has an Obama logo on it. To me,
they do?
Yeah, well, it's not explicitly, but yeah, each one of them has that logo. It's a big O with it, and then the 4 little different parts of it. It's not the explicit Obama logo, but it's definitely worked in all the colors and everything almost exactly like his campaign signs were. So
yeah, well, that's not a good sign either. When you have the government, when they pass an act into law, and then the party in power actually works that stuff. I guess you're right that I think it does seem like a subtle reference. It's not exactly the same.
But I guess it could work either way.
It's not technically the logo.
It works in favor as well as against, because it really inflames the people who don't really want to vote for him and makes the other people happy. So maybe it's just preaching to the choir.
It's still pretty scary when they start putting partisan stuff.
It's wasting money. That's what I call it.
It's a taxpayer project.
I don't want my money, my hard-earned money, Nick, going towards these road signs. I find them to be a waste of money and harmful to the environment because they're someday going to be thrown away. I don't really care that much about the environment. I want to complain, Nick. All right, moving right along. When we come back, we're going to be talking about moonshine. The failing economy, people have less money in their wallet. It's pretty stiff taxes out there if they want to go buy their own hard alcohol.
Well, that's not entirely the case. Some of these people are paying a lot of money to make moonshine. They could buy some pretty good booze.
Well, we'll be reporting on that. We'll come back. It's all illegal, no matter how they do it. We'll be coming back. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
Today, Ridley Report. Ridley here from RidleyReport.com. RidleyReport.com. At Ridleyography, I am the bomb. And I just want to tell you, you're watching FreeMindsTV.com. And they're like really cool, so you should keep watching them. FreeMindsTV.com. They are good.
This program is brought to you by FreeKeen.com. FreeKeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. FreeKeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. FreeKeen.com.
And you're watching Free Minds TV. It is Toby here with you.
Yeah, Nick.
I'd like to invite you to log on to our website, freemindsmedia.org. From there are ways to help the show financially or non-financially. Either way, there's ways to promote the show or send us a donation if you really like it. There's also ways to check out the old archives of the TV show as well as the radio show, blogs, ways to contact us, and a whole lot more. Log on to freemindsmedia.org to learn more. All right, Nick, when we left, we said we'd be coming back and talking about moonshine. It's an art that really got popular during Prohibition times back in the 1920s.
That's when one of the high points. That's the most recent high water mark for moonshining. But of course, moonshining has been big on and off throughout American history because liquor is really always, even when it wasn't prohibited, it's always been a source of revenue for the government. And especially in the earlier years of the American Republic, farmers making whiskey, turning their corn into whiskey so they could actually get it to market without it spoiling. You couldn't bring the real corn to market. Plus, they didn't have trains and things. They didn't really want to pay the taxes because that was basically taking the food out of their mouths. So it is something that most Americans associate with Prohibition, quite rightly, because it had a huge upsurge during Prohibition in the U.S. during the 1920s and 30s. But as the BBC is reporting, today, there are a growing number of Americans who are thought to be getting involved in moonshining, which is distilling illegal liquor. You can home produce beer and wine in many states. There are federal limits on that, but up to a pretty decent threshold, you can now make beer and wine at home for personal consumption up to certain limits. And at one point, that was illegal too. It wasn't until I think the 1970s when that was relaxed. But at one point, home brewing of beer, which has now become exceptionally popular and really led to a craft beer and microbrewery movement, that was also illegal. It was just as illegal really as making hard liquor. But hard liquor is still regulated by the federal government. A license to produce costs tens of thousands of dollars just for the license, not to mention, if you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars for the license, you're probably going for a commercial operation. You're looking at tons of equipment, all of that stuff. You can't just make it for yourself legally, but plenty of people are. Against the backdrop of the recession and the current craze for artisan produce, illegal distilling clubs and kitchen sink operations are popping up all over the U.S. from California to New York and Pennsylvania. Making and selling moonshine is outlawed in every U.S. state, and police do treat distilling liquor without a license as a serious crime. Obviously, that's a broad statement because there's a lot of states, a lot of cities, a lot of police departments.
Yeah,
but typically,
really, I haven't heard of a case being busted up here, and I know of, well, not too many people, but I know of quite a few people who do smaller operations, and police aren't really trying to crack down on it. And there's not a task force that I know of that's going after it.
Right.
So how serious are they really taking it?
It's illegal to possess or use marijuana too, but of course.
But there's task forces for that, Nick. I know of plenty.
I guess a lot of states
ways they're actually cracking down. Are they really setting up task force to go out and look for people making their own potato liquor?
According to the story, yes, they are. Anyone found guilty of making spirits without a license faces a fine of up to $15,000. and 5 years imprisonment.
So this is a felony.
It's a felony offense, a rather serious felony offense. Now, if you're making it in your house, and you're making a small amount for yourself, family, friends, the odds of you getting busted, no, they're not very good. But again, you're breaking federal laws here to do it. And so if you are caught, it is fairly serious. There was one story here about a 100-gallon operation, 100 gallons of moonshine and 500 gallons of mash, which is basically the malt liquor from which the moonshine is made, was found on a property of a man in Bell County, Kentucky. And this is still, the busts are fairly common down in like the Carolinas,
I've heard of those
Kentucky,
ones.
Tennessee.
You know, out in the backwoods out there. Those people, I've heard of some of those busts.
Now, moonshining had fallen off in popularity largely because while liquor is still taxed pretty heavily, it's relative to what it used to be. Relatively cheap liquor is fairly widely available. People at one point did this just because, people who are poor in West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, rural parts of Appalachia, they didn't have the money to spend, but they wanted.
It's also a trip into town.
Right, and they wanted the liquor, so.
And they might not even have spending money on the regular.
Plus, you have to remember, in some parts of the country, we don't have this tradition here in the Northeast where we're broadcasting. It hasn't stayed alive since Prohibition. But in some parts of the country, it's really a family business. Granted, it's illegal, but in the same way that some families in Europe have operated wineries or distilleries making, say, legal above-board scotch for hundreds of years, well, there are families in certain parts of the country who for generations have been making hard liquor. And really, I think the answer here is to deregulate at least the small level production. That's what they did with beer and wine a few decades ago
in
in
this
this country.
Can you imagine what else might come out?
Have you seen the amount?
Right.
I can remember even since I was a kid, just walking into convenience stores, it used to be pretty much all you could get for beer, at least in New Hampshire, in Keene, New Hampshire. Was either Budweiser, Miller, Coors, or a couple of other, Sam Adams, and imports.
Yep.
That was about it. There really weren't locally produced
now there's
beers.
all sorts of varieties of all sorts of different kinds of microbrew out there.
Right.
So much variety.
And the state of Vermont, I think, has almost 20 breweries in it now. New Hampshire has a few.
And all of that's
and it's better beer.
And it's supporting the local economy as well. Instead of some outside or out of this nation in some cases.
They're going to smaller local companies or private individuals who own them. They're relatively local. In my opinion, you can get far better beer. It's a matter of taste. Some people like Bud Light. That's fine. It's good once in a while.
It's not American.
But it's not the kind of beer I like to drink.
It's been sold.
Right.
It's not even American. Everyone thinks it's an American beer.
It's owned by InBev now. Yeah, Anheuser-Busch is owned by a big Belgian. It's really an international corporation. It's not even Belgian.
Disgusting.
But, you can get, in my opinion, far better beer, local, far better selection. And the reason you don't see that with hard liquor is because hard liquor production, even for the home level, has never been deregulated, and it costs tens of thousands of dollars to start a micro distillery. So the reason you don't see locally produced whiskeys, you see a handful, you see one or two here and there, but the reason it's not nearly as common as it is with beer or wine is government policy. Tax policy is what this all boils down to, and the amount of licensure you need. And it's relatively easy to get licensed to make beer and wine. You have way more selection, in my opinion, way better quality to pick from. And you don't see that so much with hard liquor because it wasn't deregulated. Still time to deregulate it.
Absolutely. Plus, you're wasting your money. Going after people, that's the other side of this. Not only is there less choice for the consumer in the store,
$15,000 fine.
This is some hefty penalties you're throwing at people here, and most of them aren't rather wealthy. They're not doing this on a big scale like you'd think.
And to imprison people just costs a taxpayer more money.
Just if you do have a task force going after these people, you're hiring people to go after people for doing nothing.
And just to point out, this isn't just people. I reference people in rural parts of the South. The article here is pointing out that it's believed that perhaps up to 1 million Americans are involved with distilling liquor and not paying taxes now. And a lot of them they're basically yuppies, upper middle class, suburban people doing it in apartments in Manhattan, who they're people who like fine food, fine wine,
Hipsters.
Right. There's a lot of hipsters and people like
All right.
that.
You can lock up the
doing
hipsters, but everyone else, I'd say, leave them be. All right, moving right along, Nick. I've got an article that we really need to report on. It's very serious here. This is coming from UPI.com, where Food Bank has given out a mistaken can, a mystery can, or a misread can. This coming from Florida, where a food bank in Clearwater, Florida, distributed a can labeled as superfood that turned out to be a can of dog food, the recipient said. On his Social Security, retired Air Force Captain Frank Vicido made his weekly trip from his home in Largo to his Religious Community Service Food Bank Center in Clearwater for free food. Visco was given the can labeled Senior Holistic Superfood by a volunteer who noticed that he wanted products for better health, the newspaper reported on Friday. You're a senior. This ought to be good for you, Visco remembers the man saying. The man was just trying to do a good deed. He said that Visco had wanted food that would keep him healthy as he was a senior getting older. Looked good to me, Visco said. The label boasted of glutamine, beta-carotene, vitamins, and antioxidants, and sharp vision and a strong immune system, as well as a shiny coat. Now that sounds good for any senior I know. A good old sharp coat on him. Let's see. And on the front of the can it said, healthy skin and coat, superfood that every old person or dog needs.
It's for older dogs, isn't it?
It's for older dogs, not for older people. But it might not be bad for them, Nick. You never know.
So they're claiming this was an error or just an elaborate sick joke?
They say it was an error. Actually, looking at the can, it only says dog in small letters. And I did throw the can up, so if you look and read it, I could see the definite mistake here. I mean,
so it's possible someone was just cleaning out of the cupboard and grabbed it by mistake.
Probably threw it in the food bank. But I just think, funny. Doesn't mean anything. Or should we feed old people dog food?
Well, some people...
Tell us, you decide.
Some people would be outraged by the story.
Well, the grandfather says he thinks it's funny. He says...
I find it pretty funny, too.
It's comical, he said. And I think it's funny, too.
It's not really funny that some old people do have to eat dog food.
Well, that sucks. But then again...
But, you know...
You can just go to
it's funny in a way when you have a story like this one, too.
Anyways, we're out of time. That'll do it for us. Different thoughts, different opinions. Do you think we should feed old people dog food? Send them to us, freemindsmedia.org. You got to upset some people with every story, Nick. Who was this upsetting? I had to upset someone, right?
I'm sure it did.
Hey, well, you got to always upset someone. Otherwise, we're not doing our jobs. So log on to freemindsmedia.org and tell us what you think. Until next week, it'll be Toby here with you.
And Nick.
And join us on Free Minds Radio this Sunday and every Sunday, 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a good night.